Hi, my name's Kristie Manning. I'm a pediatrician in San Francisco. I take care of kids from the newborn age to 18 years old who have been admitted to the hospital. So I'm what they call a hospitalist. And as a hospitalist, I tend to see really sad things happen to good kids. And many times these things are preventable. So I'd like to help you understand more about preventable accidents due to drug overdoses. Now, you guys have probably heard talks before about illegal drugs such as cocaine and ecstasy. But what I'd like to focus on is what people don't think about with drugs that you can overdose on and die from, and that's prescription drugs. Specifically, I'm going to focus on painkillers, but the dangers of using prescription drugs recreationally apply to all types of drugs, even something as seemingly harmless as cough syrup. So first I want to tell you about a young man I knew named Kyle. Kyle was the kind of guy who lit up a room when he entered it. He was genuine, sensitive, caring, and just a fun guy. He had a loving family who provided him with every opportunity he could hope for. He went to Amador Valley High School, played for their lacrosse team, and had built up a strong group of friends. He was popular in high school, but as one friend described, Kyle had befriended him in art class when he was new to the school. Even though Kyle sat with the cool kids at lunch, he stopped over at this friend's table to say hi every day. He said Kyle taught him what true friendship is, and never to judge a book by its cover. Kyle eventually graduated from Amador and attended Arizona State University for college. During a summer internship, he met the love of his life, Allison. As a couple, they were so cute and perfect, it almost made you sick. Because Kyle cared so much, he spent a lot of time worrying about others. He often shared with his family his concerns for a friend in college who had become addicted to cocaine. He saw how hard this friend struggled and swore never to touch the stuff. He also had two friends back home that had begun using prescription painkillers recreationally. He didn't know how to help them other than to just be their friend. And that's what makes what happened to Kyle that much more upsetting. Kyle often came home on the weekends from Sacramento, where he worked, because Allison lived in Santa Clara, and it was an easy in-between point. So on the first weekend of June 2010, he was at home. This time he had a walking boot on, because the weekend before, he broke his ankle playing football with friends. That Saturday was one of the first really warm days of the year, and he invited Allison and several friends to his parents' backyard to go swimming and lay out. He bought some beers, and his friends and he lounged by the pool drinking. It turns out his ankle was really bothering him, so he asked one of his friends who used painkillers if he could have a Norco for the pain. Knowing Allison would be upset that he took this, he pulled her aside and explained he needed one for his ankle. The crew eventually went out to a bar that evening and stayed until close. Kyle, Allison, and Kyle's two friends returned to his parents' house. Allison went to bed around 2 a.m., and Kyle and his two friends stayed up a bit longer. Kyle told Allison good night and that he loved her. Allison woke up around 8 a.m. and noticed Kyle wasn't in his bed. She went to the TV room and found him on the couch. As she tried to arouse him, she felt his cold face, and when she turned him over, she discovered he was dead. The paramedics later told her, based on his appearance, he'd likely been like that for hours. His friends never provided more details than what I have provided, but his autopsy was positive for large levels of alcohol, hydrocodone, and oxymorphone. Hydrocodone is a narcotic, and one of its brand names is Norco. Oxymorphone is also a narcotic, and its brand name is Opana. Both are in the same family as morphine and heroin, and are commonly prescribed painkillers. His friends were likely addicted to these, and the assumption is that they provided them to him to manage his ankle pain. I want you to see from this story that Kyle was not a druggie. He was a good person who befriended kids that played around with drugs. I want to take a couple points from this story and share with you all the risks of painkillers, so none of you make the same fatal decision that Kyle made that night. So let's start off with a question. Does anyone know what one of the most commonly abused painkillers is? It's not Adderall, because that's an ADHD medication. It's not Valium, that's a muscle relaxant. And it's not Xanax, because that's an anti-anxiety medication. It's OxyContin. How many of you guys have been prescribed narcotic painkillers before? Maybe for a surgery or an injury, or you know someone who has. And how many of you still have them lying around? Or maybe your parents do. And truthfully, how many of you would give a friend a pain pill if you had one and they were in pain, say from an injury? And can any of you name some common narcotic painkillers? So here I'll show you the painkiller pills that are out there, both their generic and brand names. There's MS-Contin, its generic name is morphine. Codeine, Dilaudid, its generic name is hydromorphone. Vicodin, its generic name is hydrocodone, and this is one of the more commonly prescribed categories. Other brand names in this category are Norco, Lortab, Lorcet, and Panicet. OxyContin, its generic name is oxycodone, and this is even stronger than hydrocodone. The brand names are Oxy-IR, Percocet, Roxicodone, and Percodan. Opana, its generic name is oxymorphone, and that's even stronger than oxycodone. And methadone. This is used with heroin addicts to wean them off of heroin. Painkillers travel through the bloodstream to our brain and exert their effects on our brain, significantly reducing our perception of pain. The way they do this is that they're swallowed, absorbed in our guts, broken down to their active form in the liver, and released into the circulating blood. Painkillers act on specific receptors we have located throughout our body, including our brain. Of note, they don't get rid of the problem causing the pain, just our brain's perception of the pain. So here I've listed the major side effects of painkillers, and some people experience these side effects so badly that they can't take the painkillers. So there's dry mouth, nausea, vomiting, constipation, itching, hallucinations, dizziness, drowsiness, and delirium. But what I've put here in bold is euphoria, because that's the most common reason for abuse. And if you don't know, that's kind of described as this feeling of happiness, like you're floating in the clouds and you have no worries in the world. So does anyone here know how we breathe? Like how we know when to breathe? How about when we sleep? How do we breathe then? Well, the respiratory center is in our brainstem, which I've circled here in red. It contains cells that tell us to breathe. It controls the rate and depth of respiratory movements of the diaphragm and other respiratory muscles. This type of control is an involuntary control, meaning you don't have to think about it to do it. Like, are you thinking about breathing right now? We do have voluntary control in our upper brain structures when we're awake and actively telling ourselves to breathe. For instance, take a deep breath. You've just used your upper brain structures to tell yourself to breathe in a certain way. One of the major side effects of painkillers is what we in medicine call respiratory depression. What we're referring to are the drug's effects on the cells in the respiratory center through receptors that are located there. These drugs bind to these receptors and tell the respiratory center to slow down or stop breathing. Higher doses of the drugs can cause more slowing and can eventually cause you to stop breathing and die. If you're awake, you can use your upper brain structures, as I mentioned before, to actively tell yourself to breathe. But once you fall asleep, you only have the cells in your respiratory center to tell you to breathe. And if these drugs are telling the respiratory cells not to breathe, you can see how this can be deadly. The problem is, painkillers also make you drowsy and can cause you to sleep so deeply that nothing's going to wake you up, not even a lack of oxygen. Once you fall asleep, you are completely dependent on your respiratory center to continue your breathing. And without it, your breathing will eventually slow and then stop altogether. Without breathing, you don't have oxygen, and without oxygen, your heart can't pump. And with no blood pumping through your body shuts down and eventually dies. Now, there are other substances, including commonly abused prescription drugs, that act on the respiratory center the same way painkillers do. There's alcohol, a class of drugs called benzodiazepines, which you may recognize some of the brand names, like Valium, which is a muscle relaxant, Ativan, Xanax, and Klonopin, which are anxiety medications, and Rohypnol, which is actually the date rape drug. GHB, another class of drugs called barbiturates, which are similar to benzodiazepines. They're older, and so once benzos were on the market, they weren't really used or abused much, but their street names are Downers, Yellow Jackets, Purple Hearts, and Pink Ladies. And there's other sedatives, like some of the newer sleeping medications, Ambien and Lunesta, and also marijuana and Benadryl. So this problem multiplies if you happen to be mixing these substances, and it doesn't necessarily take too much of either one to slow down or stop your breathing. Several prescription drugs have short half-lives, meaning you're going to have to take these pills frequently throughout the day to control your symptoms. Extended release tablets were created to overcome this problem. The pill gets absorbed slowly so that one pill can last you most of the day. These pills are sensitive to anything that destroys this special mechanism, such as breaking them, chewing them, crushing them, or dissolving them. This causes a rapid release of the drug and then rapid absorption by the body of potentially deadly doses. The common way people abuse these types of pills are to crush them and snort them, giving them a massive dose all at once. So all it takes is someone to hand you a broken extended release pill that was originally made to give you small doses over an extended period of time, but since it's broken, will give you a large, potentially deadly dose in your system. Examples of extended release painkillers are MS-Contin, OxyContin ER, and the ER stands for extended release, and Apana ER. Tolerance is the process through which receptors in your body that the prescription drugs bind to become desensitized and intolerant to their effect. Therefore, you need larger doses for the same effect. So if you're going for that feeling of euphoria that you got the first time, each time you're going to have to take higher and higher doses to get that same feeling. Tolerance to the commonly abused prescription drugs is often fairly rapid. Using OxyContin as an example, here are all the doses available on the market. If a kid comes to the hospital in pain and has never been prescribed painkillers before, I'm going to start by giving them the 10 milligram dose. And that's a pretty common starting dose, even for adults. If their pain continues, I can gradually increase the dose once I've seen that they aren't too drowsy and their breathing hasn't slowed. Well, those abusing OxyContin are usually using the 80 milligram pills. That's 8 times the starting dose for someone who's never used painkillers before. So because of this process of tolerance, they can handle these pills. But if they hand that pill to a friend who's never used them before, you can see how one pill can be deadly. Addiction is defined as poor control over drug use, compulsive drug use, continued use of a drug despite physical, mental, and/or social harm, and a craving for the drug. Addiction is a disease that affects your brain and your behavior. You have control over your choice to start using drugs, but once you start, their pleasurable effects make you want to keep using. Over time, your brain actually changes in certain ways, so the powerful urge to use drugs controls your behavior. Physical dependence is the body's adaptation to a drug. In other words, the individual's body gets used to receiving regular doses of a certain medication. And when the medication is stopped, or the amount is reduced too quickly, the person will experience withdrawal symptoms. Common withdrawal symptoms to painkillers are restlessness, muscle and bone pain, insomnia, diarrhea, vomiting, cold flashes, and involuntary leg movements. Genes can determine addiction. One study discovered that if a parent has a drug or alcohol addiction, the child has an 8 times greater chance of developing an addiction. So because of your genetic makeup, you may be someone who feels sick from a drug, while it makes other people feel good. You also may be someone who becomes addicted right away and struggles with severe withdrawal symptoms. So while you think you're just having a good time with friends and maybe decide you want to try these pills, you may be setting yourself up for addiction. And I think it's safe to say that no one who's ever been addicted to these pills started out with the intent of becoming addicted. In 2010, approximately 7 million people aged 12 or older met the criteria for dependence or abuse involving non-medical use of prescription drugs. That's about equal to the populations of San Francisco, San Jose, Los Angeles, and San Diego combined. Those aged 25 or younger had higher rates of dependence or abuse than those aged 26 or older. Another study showed the risk of dependence or abuse was higher among people who initiated use before age 16 than those who were 16 or older. One theory behind this is that at the younger ages, your brain is still developing and forming those nerve pathways. And if you introduce these drugs during that time, your brain literally becomes wired to think you need them to function. In 2010, of the estimated 3 million people aged 12 or older who started using drugs for the first time in the past year, a majority reported that their first drug use was marijuana at 61.8%. But nearly 1/4 started by abusing prescription drugs. And just pain relievers alone were the second most popular drug that people used for the first time at 17.3%. The previous chart was for anyone 12 or older and focused on those who just started using drugs that year. But if you just focus on adolescents, no matter how long they've been using, these are the drugs they're abusing. Prescription and over-the-counter meds are seen here in orange and account for the most commonly abused illicit drugs by high school seniors. Nearly 1 in 12 abuse Vicodin, and 1 in 20 abuse OxyContin. So another question, what do you guys think is the most common way people are obtaining painkillers? A, from drug dealers, B, from friends or family, C, from stealing, or D, their own doctor? Well, it's B, from their friends or family. Among people aged 12 or older in 2009 to 2010 who used painkillers in the past 12 months, 55% got them from a friend or relative for free. About 17% got them through a prescription from one doctor. About 11% bought them from a friend or relative. Almost 5% took them from a friend or relative without asking. About 4% got them from a drug dealer or stranger. And 0.4% bought them on the internet. This chart shows how the deaths each year from 1999 to 2008 from narcotic painkiller overdoses are increasing and is an example of the increasing epidemic in our country. For first-time offenders, the maximum penalty for selling prescription drugs or furnishing them to another person is 5 years in state prison. So this goes back to that question I asked you guys. If you had these painkillers and you gave them to a friend for whatever reason, and something happened to that friend, you could go to jail. So prescription drugs are just as deadly as street drugs, just as addictive, just as illegal if you're taking them without a prescription. And just because a doctor prescribes these doesn't mean they can't be abused. As you can see from Kyle's story, it only takes one time of trying them to kill you. What I hope you guys got from this is a familiarity with the different types of painkillers, an understanding of how they treat pain, an understanding of their common and their deadly side effects, what can happen when you mix drugs and alcohol, why some people can tolerate higher doses of painkillers while you might not be able to, and how different formulations of painkillers can result in deadly consequences. I hope you guys have learned something from this talk. If I can save one life by addressing people like yourselves, then maybe Kyle didn't die in vain. What I didn't mention earlier was that Kyle was my baby brother. He was 23 when he died. He'll be missed every second of every day by his parents, his siblings, his girlfriend, his grandmother, and his many, many friends. So I hope you can take a moment to think about how you'd feel if you lost someone to something that could have been prevented. Now I want you to imagine how your friends and family would feel if they lost you. Imagine some stupid decision you made that changed their lives forever. Imagine how Kyle must feel if he could see the scenes that played out on June 6, 2010. When at 9:07 a.m. his big sister's cell phone rang and she noticed his girlfriend Allison's name come up. When a hysterical Allison could only repeat, "Kristie, you need to come home. Something's happened to Kyle. I'm not allowed to tell you. They said they want to make sure you drive safely." How when I finally forced Allison to put "they" on the phone, a man's voice simply said, "Kyle's dead." When his family's home looked like a scene out of a crime show. When his family had to sit downstairs while he lay dead upstairs, because what they don't tell you on those crime shows is that the coroner doesn't come right away. And that day it took 3 hours for the coroner to come take him from his home forever. When his beloved older brother Ryan did not join the rest of the family in the backyard, who couldn't bear to see him in a body bag, but rather felt it was his duty as the older brother to watch over Kyle as he was taken away. When his dad had to sit on a 5-hour plane ride and write his eulogy on the plane. When on that Sunday night, his family, who typically would have all sat at the table for family dinner, instead sat at the table to make funeral arrangements and try to decide if Kyle would rather be buried or cremated, because it never occurred to them to ask. And lastly, how his friends and family visit his gravesite to honor his birthday every year on April 12th. I promise you, if Kyle could see all that happened after that one stupid decision he made, nobody would be more mad at him than him.
How old are you, Kai? No. How many? How many? How many? Yeah, that's right. Now, what's your name? Tell Daddy your name. Huh?
Kyle.
Kyle what?
Kyle Manning.
Now what? Kyle what?
Kyle Manning.
What was it? Kyle.
Manning. Kyle Manning.
Let me hear it. Let me hear it again. What is it?
Kyle Manning.
Yeah. He's coming pretty soon.
And Peggy.
And who else?
And Grandma.
Who else?
And Chuck. Huh?
Santa Claus.
Santa Claus. Take pictures.
Huh?
Take picture.
I did take a picture.
Oh, yeah.
Careful. Huh?
Making sound.
Did you look both ways?
Yeah.
Look both ways one more time. Go quick. Wave goodbye to Daddy. You should wave goodbye to Daddy. Wave goodbye to Daddy.
Bye.
We'll see you later.